for everything. I'm happy to present Xiaoying Liu. Xiaoying, as many of you know, is a postdoctoral fellow here at Penn. She's partly associated with us here in the Pop Center. She's also been associated, I never remember the name, the Center for Study of Contemporary China. I almost said Contemporary Study of China. You went to catch a PhD at University College London.
That's right.
And you've been here, and she's been here since. She's an economist, an environmental economist. One of the things that has interested me a lot in the last couple of years of directing the PSC is how much work people are doing in various forms regarding what was once something everybody thought population was related to the environment, but sort of disappeared for several decades and lately has reemerged. This talk draws on a project that she's working on with some other familiar names, Jerry Behrman, Emily Hannum, which exploits some really fascinating data to see how much air pollution is related to lots of things, but in this case, birth outcomes. So without further ado, thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me here. I have been around for quite a while, and this is my first time to present my work here, so I'm really excited about it. So this study is part of the collaborative project between Penn and Guangdong Provincial Women and Children Hospital in South China. And there are two types of data that is involved in this project. One is the administrative birth certificate data in the Guangdong province, and the second is the birth cohort data that we're planning to construct and collect. So we have obtained the seeded funds from Penn, Wharton China Center to do a pilot study, and we are applying for NIH and NSF, and NSF is currently under review, and we've already seeked some fund from inside China that we may be able to start the birth cohort collection very soon. So this birth cohort study will be very exciting. We'll enroll the pregnant women from their first prenatal check at the hospital, one of the women and the children hospital from 7 cities, the 7 most populated cities in that province, and we'll follow them up during the whole pregnancy period and at birth and at 1 and 2 year old to collect more child development outcomes. So, but today the work that I'm presenting is to use the administrative birth certificates data and to look at the impact of air pollution on birth outcomes. So in 2016, WHO updated, created an interactive map on the global mean ambient pollution and PM 2.5. PM 2.5 is the particular matters that with the diameters less than 2.5 microgram per cubic meter. And we see that more than 80% of, it is estimated that more than 80% of the world's urban population lives in places where air quality levels exceed WHO limits. And here we see that mainly people in Africa, Middle East, and China, and Asia, and Southeast Asia, and also China, that has very high PM 2.5 levels.
Is the yellow already?
Sorry, warmer here. Yeah, warmer colors means more polluted. And the yellow here is between 11 to 15 microgram per cubic meter. Yeah, it's above. So the WHO recommended the safe limit of PM 2.5 as 10 microgram per cubic meter. So any level above 10 is hazardous to human health. And this is also the distribution graph showing PM10 level. We also see the similar pattern in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and West Pacific region. Because China relied heavily on coal to power its rapid industrialization, and it has become one of the most polluted countries in the world, with annual mean of PM2.5 as between 68 and 128 microgram per cubic meter. Among the most polluted 100 cities in the world in 2016, 30 were from China. So here, the bottom left image is the bottom left image is the remote sensing image from NASA. It shows it happened in the winter of 2016 when there was a big smog in the northern China. Okay. So the ambient air pollution is probably the is very hazardous to the human health. Epidemiological evidence has already shown that air pollution causes acute lower respiratory problems, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, strokes, ischemic heart disease, and lung cancer. It caused more than 3 million premature deaths worldwide every year, but there is limited evidence of impact of prenatal air pollution on prematurity and birth weight. So this serves as the motivation of our study, that we would like to provide more evidence from the developing countries where the air pollution is the most severe. Mm-hmm. There has been evidences on prenatal exposure and birth outcomes in developed countries. In utero air pollution exposure results in adverse birth outcomes and increased infant mortality, and it has been a lot of evidences has been summarized in the review studies by SRAM or Carey in 2014. And early life exposure to pollution has not only has impact on birth outcomes, but also has impact on long-term consequences in terms of school test scores, IQ scores, and lifetime earnings. There has been lab studies showing the biological mechanisms from air pollutants to birth outcomes. So, for example, sulfur dioxide can lead to a developmental and a functional toxicities, and nitrate dioxide can suppress antioxidant defense. And early fetal exposure to particulate matter can alter trophoblast formation and vascularization of the placenta. But the evidence from developing, although nearly 86% of the most extreme concentrations were experienced by populations in developing countries such as China, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, there's very limited research has been done in these countries. And some studies show some evidences do emerge from developing countries. For example, in Mexico, studies find carbon dioxide increases infant mortality, and reduction in AOD can lead to reduction in respiratory-related infant mortality. And in India, studies also find air pollution regulations can reduce ambient pollution, but no statistically significant improvement in infant mortality has been found. In Indonesia, the wildfires is found to lead 0.2% decrease in cohort size. Studies in China is very rare, and most are associations, not causality. So there's a review study finds that sulfur dioxide is associated with low birth weight, preterm delivery, and particular PM10 is associated with congenital anomalies, but no consistent findings for nitric dioxide. In the economic studies, people tend to use natural experiments to exploit exogenous variation in air quality to study the outcome on the health. And so, for example, the Indonesia wildfires that which I just mentioned, and some other studies to use the Chernobyl disaster, look at and Curry and Walker studied the opening of Yizhe Pass to Plaza, so to exploit the temporal and spatial variation in the opening of Yizhe Pass to look at the impact on the birth outcomes in terms of birth weight and prematurity. And some studies has also used natural experiments in China. For example, in Tongliang, where is the southwest of China, where it's very rich in coal, researchers compare the birth cohorts before and after a shutdown of a coal-fired power plant, and to compare the birth outcomes such as birth head circumferences, and they found that there is a significant increase in the head circumferences after the shutdown of a power plant. And He Guojun used Beijing Olympics to study the impact of air pollution on the general population's mortality. So this paper, we also try to estimate the causal impacts of prenatal air pollution exposure on birth outcomes in South China, and we exploit a natural experiment. Here, the natural experiment is in vain as the natural experiments I just mentioned. So it wasn't designed to improve any birth outcomes, but to improve the air quality, and through that, there is an indirect impact on the birth outcomes. So this natural experiment is Guangzhou Asian Games and Asian Paralympic Games held in November 1st and December 20th in 2010, during which period air quality was exogenously improved. And we adopt a difference in difference estimation strategy to compare the birth cohorts with different levels of exposure to these Asian Games and compare their birth outcomes. And we also examine the heterogeneity of the effects across sex, maternal age, and agenational group. So let me talk a bit about these Asian Games and the air quality control initiatives in Guangzhou. So this Asian Games was held in 2010 in Guangzhou. And the local government, or Guangzhou provincial government, adopted several stages of the regulations in order to improve the air quality during the games. So here are the list of all the games of all the regulations, and especially during the game period, which is stage 7. So they implement a very strict air quality controls during the Asian Games. And what does it mean? So here I have a list of the very detailed regulations and the deadlines. We can see that. So for example, since November 1st, 2009, high emission cars are only limited in certain areas and certain times. And by December 31st of 2009, papermaking plant is required to complete desulfurization, and Guangzhou Steel Company is required to convert coal furnaces to clean fuels. And by June 30th in 2010, power plant is required to complete desulfurization, and they also upgrade the quality standard for gasoline for motor vehicles. And by September 30th in 2010, 28 key power plants is required to complete installing denitrification facilities, and the low steam capacity industrial boilers need to be phased out. So, and since between October 20th and December 20th, so in that 2-month period, there's extreme controls involving temporary production shutdowns and traffic controls, ensuring that concentrations of sulfur dioxide, nitrous dioxide, and PM10 are lower than the national standard second levels. So these regulations, we would argue that is binding, because Chinese government, they really emphasize their international image, and so they intend to make use of these international conferences, sports events to promote their image in the international world. So and we can also see later that from the data quality, from the air quality data, that we can also see there's improvement in the air quality. So our study area here, we have Guangzhou City, but there are only 3 districts in Guangzhou we have data of. And we also use Haikou and Sanya in Hainan province as a control group. And here is in the map, sorry. It's not very, you can't see. Here, Guangdong is in the South China. This yellow province is Guangdong province, and Guangzhou is kind of in the middle of the province. And Haikou, Sanya in Hainan province is the southeast in China. It's on an island, and Haikou is at least 600 kilometers away from Guangzhou. So we use that as a control group because we think it is not very likely to be affected by this Asian Games air quality control. So the data we used is the administrative birth certificate data from 2009 and 2011, and we also used the monitored air pollution and weather data from 2008 to 2011. Here is because at that time there is no uniform birth certificate system in Guangzhou. So the birth certificate data we get from different districts and different provinces have different structures. They collect different information. The information available to us is very different. So we tried our best to get the uniform birth outcomes we can look at. So gestational age is collected in our data, and birth weight and birth length, but for other APGA scores, infant death is collected only in Guangzhou, but very few observed in Haikou, which is not very likely to reflect the real infant mortality. And stillbirth is only collected in one district. and also the availability for the control variables for the mother's characteristics are also not very uniform. So only two districts has maternal age, and one district has mother's education. We include the birth weight between 500 grams and 5,000 grams in our data in our sample, and we only include if the gestational age is over 28 weeks, and we only study the singleton births.
So, can you? I mean, I see that, and that's a rule that you can implement it on a computer. But what's the rationale for that if the pollutants are supposed to make weird things happen? I mean, sometimes when people don't like pollutants, they point to fish that have two heads and things like that. I'm not being facetious. I mean, you know, that's what people worry about when they worry about metals in their environment.
First of all, we're not studying the birth abnormality as an outcome. So we mainly focus on the general births population. So
okay, maybe I should just listen to hear what the outcomes are.
Okay. So the air pollution level we're looking at, the air pollution data and the weather data. So the air pollution data we used is from the administrative monitoring data at city level from 2008 to 2011, and it has a daily average concentration of three pollutants: nitrous dioxide, PM10, and sulfur dioxide. These are the three criteria pollutants that were monitored at that time. But since 2014, three more pollutants were added, so including PM2.5, carbon monoxide, and ozone. And we also include weather data from NCAR, so it's a National Center for Atmospheric Research in the U.S. Because they have a data sharing plan for on the atmospheric data. We include hourly temperature, precipitation, wind speed, and relative humidity as a control. And here is the pollutants concentrations over time. So here, I'm not sure whether you can read very carefully. So around January 2011, this is the time for the Asian Games. Okay, when we compare it to the same period in the previous year and the year after, there is a reduction in air pollutants levels, and we can also see there is a downward trend for sulfur dioxide, which may reflect the government efforts to reduce sulfur dioxide concentrations.
I'm sorry. So I apologize. I'm getting older. I can't see. I can't distinguish the control ones from the. Control cities. You mean is the dashed line, which is very low. So here it's very trivial concentrations. So it's just that basically horizontal line across the bottom. It's not in all that other stuff. Okay.
No, but it's because Hainan is generally has very clean air. So
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So we measure the prenatal exposure measurements as the accumulated exposures during the entire pregnancy. And we define the pregnancy period as we work backwards from the birth weight and the gestational age to work out the conception date, and then we work forward to define the gestational period and each trimester, and we calculate the accumulated exposures of air pollutants for the whole entire pregnancy and for each trimester. And the outcome measures we have 3 outcome measures. One is low birth weight and birth weight and the preterm.
Not real low. Nothing monstrous.
Right.
Normal. That's
Were you applying some kind of WHO standard of live birth versus stillbirth? Because, I mean, in some previous definitions, there were issues about birth weight that needed to be there for the birth to actually count as a live birth. Maybe that's part of the decision that you made, and the 28 weeks as well. Perhaps that was the logic behind this exclusion criteria.
Yeah.
Just thinking it'd be useful to know more about that.
Okay, thanks. And here lists the basic statistics by city. The preterm rate in that area is about 7% in Guangzhou, and then 5% in Hainan province, and the birth weight is about 3,000, and the low birth weight rate is about 6%, or 5%, between 5% and 6% in this population.
I apologize again, but
Sorry.
That's over the whole period, including both the treatments and the controlled periods for Guangzhou?
That's right, yeah.
Okay,
so this is
the average over.
The average over, yeah. During 3 years period. And the daily, and I also work out the daily average concentration of different pollutants. So for the PM10 is about 72 microgram per cubic meter at a daily level, which is way above the WHO recommended level. And here is, we also list the statistics for the other control variables. This is the empirical model that we use to identify the causal impact. So the equation 2 is the outcome variable. Y is the birth outcomes, and P is the mother's accumulated exposure to 3 pollutants during the pregnancy. And X is the maternal characteristics, M is the meteorological conditions. We control for the district fixed effect and conception year fixed effect and also birth month fixed effect. Because people choose where they live, so the exposure to the air pollutants may be selective. So in order to estimate the causal impact, we instrument this pollution, the air pollution level by the exposure to the Asian Games. So here, so if if the mother lives in Guangzhou and also has exposure and her pregnancy is overlapped with the Asian Games period, then the mother is exposed to Asian Games period. That means so this gamma captures this variation. Okay. And we define this GI in 3 different ways. One way is a binary variable indicating whether one's pregnancy is completely overlaps with the duration of Asian Games. And the second way is to show whether is indicating whether one's pregnancy has any overlap with the Asian Games. And the third definition we used is a continuous variable measuring how much pregnancies overlaps with Asian Games. And because the longer pregnancy term implies more accumulated pollution exposure, which can cause a spurious correlation from pollution to the pregnancy term. So we use expected pregnancy as in a definition to define this exposure variable. So we assume everybody has a full term, say 39 weeks of the gestational age, and then to work out whether one's pregnancy in this expected whether one's expected pregnancy overlaps with Asian Games period. Here is the first stage result by different definitions of this G and for different pollutants. So IV, A, B, C are the three definitions we just talked about. We see by no matter what definitions we use, that there is a significant reduction in all these three pollutants during the Asian Games period. Okay, so the first line here, the first row here shows that compared to a pregnant woman who has whose pregnancy did not overlap with Asian Games at all, then this woman's exposure to PM10 is 8.2% lower. Okay, and
can you go back to why in that exclusion equation you've got individual characteristics for, like the maternal characteristics, the XI? And that's just because people with different statuses live in different places, or what's? I understand why it's down there in the second equation. I guess the first equation looks so much like the second equation. I was just trying to figure out why all the same variables are in there.
So different ages may have different levels of exposure to air pollution. They may choose where to live, or they have different the vulnerability. But this is by structure. So all the other control variables will enter into the first stage. But the exclusion restriction is in this yellow highlighted term. We assume there's no any direct effect of Asian Games overlapping with Asian Games in the pregnancy will have any direct impact on birth outcomes, but only through the air pollution. And so here is the OLS estimation of equation 2. So no any instrument variables. Well, we see because of this spurious correlation between the accumulated exposure and pregnancy terms. So the result is a bit wild, but then since we have instrument variables, and here panel B, C, D are using different IVs that we just mentioned, and for each pollutant, they enter the regressions separately. So each line represents a separate regression, and because the pollutants are correlated very much, so in order to consider that, we also work out the principal component of the three pollutants and use that as a single pollution exposure variable in the regression. So if we just focus on panel D, we see that air pollution do cause the adverse birth outcomes. So by increasing the low birth weight and decrease the average birth weight and increase the prematurity. So how do we interpret that, the results? Here, the pollutants are the pollution concentrations are the log. So that means this is semi-elasticity of the coefficient. 10% reduction in PM10 during the pregnancy can lead to 0.5% lower in low birth weight rate, and 9.7 grams higher in the average birth weight, and 0.8% lower in the prematurity rate. Yes.
Question, because I don't know so much about the link between pollutants and early childhood outcomes. Is there a conceptual kind of backing to be able to lump them all together, or might some pollutants be linked to certain outcomes while others to other outcomes?
Not sure. There's some, as I displayed in the earlier slides, there are some lab studies have shown the biological mechanisms between certain air pollutants and certain outcomes. But in the epidemiological studies, we are still people are still studying the general evidence from the pollutants and general birth outcomes, mainly measured in birth weight and preterm delivery. Yeah. And on average, so in aggregate, 10% reduction in all the air pollutants can improve the low birth, decrease the low birth weight by 1.3%, and increase the birth weight by 23 grams, and reduce the preterm delivery by 2%. Because this is log, so the coefficient here shows the semi-elasticity. And we also here demonstrate the impacts by trimester. So the solid square is the first trimester, and the circle is second trimester, and triangle is third trimester. So we see there's for PM10 and NO2, all three trimester exposure caused adverse birth outcomes, but for sulfur dioxide, we only see that first trimester plays the critical role. And here we did some robustness check by controlling for maternal age and tested for population composition change by excluding one district, which is the district where the sports the spots will be held in that district. So we presume that there's a new housing availability in that area, which may change the composition of the population. So we exclude this district and test the robustness of our result. And the third robustness check we did is to control for the city-specific annual trend by including this term highlighted in yellow. So the district effect multiplied by the conception year fixed effect. So this table shows the first two robustness check top panel shows if we control for the maternal age and its projected term, we found that the result on prematurity is still significant, but the result on birth weight and low birth weight is not significant. Is not statistically significant. And if we exclude the Panyu district, we found a similar story, but the impact on low birth weight is still there. And if we control for the city-specific annual trend, we found the signs of the coefficients stay the same, but the size is multiplied by many times. So I don't have an explanation yet for this one. And if we characterized by the results by the heterogeneity across sex, we found that for some pollutants, for example, NO2, we find for NO2 in the birth weight, we find that male fetuses are more vulnerable to, and also the SO2. We found male fetuses are more vulnerable to air pollution than the female fetuses. But only the exception is SO2 in the second trimester for the risk of prematurity.
And that's conditional on being born.
That's right, of course.
Yeah.
But for the survived fetuses, they show more vulnerability to air pollution.
I guess I was just curious how all this fits in with, what was at least at one time the standard narrative about, that at conception there's far more would-be male fetuses conceived, and then nature has a way of, culling the ones that aren't going to survive. There's a lot of spontaneous, abortions. We used to not really be able to see that. I gather people can see more of this now than they used to, but and that there's a sex ratio at birth that's somehow some kind of adjustment function of that higher mortality among could have been males. And I guess that's why I was kind of pushing on the whole thing about the what's that word, teratogenicity, the monstrosity stuff. Because in one sense, it's all of a continuity that starts at conception. Mm-hmm. And just to talk about quote unquote normal births that are a little bit abnormal but not that abnormal is kind of ignoring the fact that, at least back when I learned this stuff, nature was rapaciously over-selecting on the males, right up until age 108.
Mm-hmm. But at least the variation we hear is not across any cities. It's within a certain period, right? It's the exposure we here look at is the air pollution exposure. So the only variation is from there. If there, I don't know whether that explains the whole story, but at least for the survived fetuses, the air pollution, we found the male fetus are more vulnerable to the air pollution, based on this variation in the pregnancy overlapped with the Asian Games, because that's where the variation is from.
Yes, in the data. That's right.
Right.
I'm just trying to think about the.
Right. I understand your I don't.
Okay.
Right. I don't have a
I mean, on the top of the usual excess male mortality that we find since conception, there is an extra vulnerability that comes from pollution. On the top of that, I guess that's
right.
to think about these results, right? It's true that excess male mortality is still in conception, and it's actually very high.
Right.
Higher than what you see, first day.
Can I ask you some
Sure.
these results really control for maternal age? Because in the previous studies you showed that you include maternal age, just
The basic
disappears. So does this include maternal age? Or?
the basic result doesn't include maternal age because only one district has maternal age in the birth certificate data. So that's why we did a robustness check by including maternal age. The effect on the birth weight disappeared, but then the effect on the prematurity stayed. So that's the takeaway message. And we also found that younger mothers, below 35, and higher educated mothers can shield fetuses away from the adverse birth outcomes. So they are they're protective in terms of against air pollution exposure. And we also, in the end, we did experiment by test whether our results would change if we define the Asian Games period in a different way. So here the vertical line, it shows the effect we estimated with the real Asian Games period defined. But then if we define the Asian Game period took place 1 month earlier, or 4 months earlier, and 6 months earlier, which is defined based on the regulation period that we presented earlier, and we found that the impact is really temporary. So only around the Asian Games period we found there's significant effect on the risk of prematurity, but then 3 months later this impact disappeared. So that means this is really a temporary regulations which restrict air pollution, air quality. But then soon after the Asian Games, the benefit of these regulations just vanished. Okay, so in summary, we found that air quality was much improved during the Asian Games period, and strong evidence indicates that all 3 pollutants impact preterm delivery. However, the impacts on low birth weight rate and average birth weight disappear after controlling for maternal age. And exposures to PM10 and NO2 during any trimester cause adverse birth outcomes, but only first trimester exposure to SO2 has significant adverse effects. And we found that male fetuses are more vulnerable to air pollution than girls, which is consistent with some findings in the literature. And a younger maternal age and a higher education can shield fetuses from adverse birth outcomes from air pollution. And the benefits from air quality control during the Asian Games are only temporary, and the benefits vanish 3 months later. And the strength of the paper has the unique administrative birth certificate data, which is not very commonly used in Chinese literature. And air pollutants concentrations, we used individual air pollutants concentrations instead of just the general air quality index, which is created by which is an index that's calculated based on the individual air pollutants. And our identification strategy allow us to estimate causal impact instead of just associations. But of course, the disadvantage of we have drawbacks in the study. We don't have many controls for maternal characteristics, and we don't have many birth outcomes that we can look at, is especially the birth complications and infant mortality. And the last one is the air pollution exposure. We only use the administer monitoring air pollution quality, air quality. We don't have individual specific air pollution exposure measurement, which is which will be the new development in this area, in this field, to have a individual specific measurement of air pollution exposure by either use the chemical numerical models or by wearing a portable device that can capture the exposure levels.
I apologize because, as you know, I got to run out in a minute to teach. But when you talk about the inaccurate measurement of individual air pollution exposure, I mean, that's always going to be a tough one. But again, in your equation 1, the predicted values include individual specific characteristics. So in a sense, the treatments do have this individual variation. They're functions of status characteristics, not necessarily. I mean,
right, but most are actually. So here is many use the individual variation in the pregnancy period, but we don't have individual's location. So people who live next to the road will be very different from people who live in the park, in the center of the forest, right? So,
but I mean, in most, I don't know about China, but in lots of places, your income, your education, things like that are often measures of whether you're near.
Well, sure, yeah, that's true, but we don't have very good measurement of individual characteristics here either. So we don't have income, we don't have.
Okay, so that X is mostly age.
X, age, and education.
So you do have education. So that's, I appreciate it. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's the end. Any questions? Thank you. Yeah.
So in the chronology of anti-pollution measures that you had, I mean, the Asian Games were really one out of many other series of measures that were taking place before and after. And so how can you isolate this very specific period of the Asian Games as opposed to what was happening before and after? It didn't happen in a vacuum.
That's right. So in the basic results, we only use the last 2 months here as the exposure period. But then
all Asian Games preparatory measures.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, I think there were other things. I know there are other reasons that there were air quality control issues going on, but all of these are about making sure the Asian Games are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All these were for that, towards this purpose.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before November 2009, there weren't any specific.
Yeah, right. We don't see many. Yeah.
Concerned about actually.
Right. But we did in the last experiment it was extend the definition of Asian Games period backward till November, I think November 1st, and then see whether there is any impact that we can capture. But then we only see that the strong impact comes from these 2 months during the Asian Games, where the most extreme regulations were implemented. Yeah.
Is there any regulation that force certain group of people to leave some migrants?
That's a good question. It happened in Beijing Olympics. I didn't see any news reports about that. But then, Yeah, I don't think we can also tell from the birth certificate whether some are migrants or not. I don't think. Now since 2014, they designed a new birth certificate system which documents the residence of the status of the mother. But then back to 2010, I don't think you can tell from that. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah.
This is just a measurement question, but I'm wondering. I know there's lots of concerns in developed countries like the U.S. about the use of gestational age as a measure, and that it's really hard for women to sometimes calculate and remember exactly when their last period was, and then calculating, gestational age based on that becomes, I would imagine, more challenging in developing contexts. But I'm wondering if you could talk about that, or if you have any sense of how accurate that, given that some of your results you found only for gestational age but not for birth weight and other things, if you could just talk about that.
Okay. So first of all, this is in the urban area. So the sample is from in the urban, and then they're very highly educated. So about 50% have at least 50% has high school education, and then about 30 or 40% has college degree. So this is in Guangzhou. This is a very high educated group, and in the urban area. And if it's the mismeasurement of the gestational age, because the identification strategy is to use the variation in the overlapping of pregnancy between pregnancy and Asian Games, I don't see there is any systematic correlation between the measurement error in the gestational age and with that IV.
Yeah,
so
I wasn't a concern with the findings, more just a question about the measurement strategy more generally.
Right.
Given the concerns about using that as a measure.
Right. I think now they're improving by using the ultrasound image as well. But that's definitely a concern in the report, in the self-reported gestation age. And we in that data we see that in rural areas or in the more remote areas, the rate of preterm delivery is actually lower, but partly may be explained by the misreports of the gestation age. Yeah.
No more questions. Her asked me to close up since he had to leave for a class. So,
Okay.
thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Thank you.